Her ex-husband left her for someone else, and then invited her to his wedding just to watch her break. He forced her up on stage, expecting silence or shame, but when she grabbed the microphone, the entire room froze. No one could have predicted what she'd do next. Subscribe and drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from. The smell of pine and distant smoke always reminded Aaliyah Brooks of home, a small corner of southwest Atlanta where narrow porches and distant train whistles wrapped around her childhood. It's where she found her voice. Not just a good voice, a voice that could stop people mid-sentence, make them listen. Her mother used to say, "Girl, that's not just talent. That's God living in your throat." That voice made Aaliyah feel real, rooted, like she had a purpose in a world that rarely knew what to do with someone like her. But now at 32, silence filled her apartment more than song. The place was tucked between an overgrown lot and a shut-down salon with a peeling sign that read, "Glory and Shine." Her walls were lined with vinyl records she hadn't sold, Sarah Vaughan, Nina Simone, and her prized copy of Abby Lincoln's Throw It Away. That one she treated like scripture. Once, her voice filled churches and late-night lounges. She'd perform barefoot under summer skies or on tiny stages where no one expected to be moved, and then she'd leave them changed. She thought music would be her passport across the world. Then she met Thomas. She was 23. He was 25 in law school, already walking like he had everything figured out. She was playing piano at a campus open mic when she first caught his eye. After the show, he came over with words that didn't sound rehearsed, and a week later, they were inseparable. In the beginning, he was curious, thoughtful. He listened like her lyrics mattered. He remembered her favorite artists. With Thomas, she felt seen, safe even. He spoke of their future like it was already built. For once, she allowed herself to believe she could have both love and her voice. But it didn't break all at once. It wore down, slowly, over 5 years. When she was invited to join a touring jazz group, something she dreamed about forever, Thomas gently said, "But you'd be gone for months, right?" Underneath was a quiet demand, "Choose me." And she did. She told herself more chances would come. That love needed sacrifice. But gigs stopped coming. First the out-of-town shows, then local spots, even church Sundays. Instead, she planned his work events, ran his errands, and helped him climb. She thought once he made it, she could sing again. But months turned into years. When he told her to dial it down around his colleagues, she thought he was joking. When he commented on her earrings, she left them in her purse. When he sighed at her humming, she stopped. Little by little, she dimmed. By 28, she barely recognized herself. She wore quiet colors, measured every word, and hadn't sung, not on stage, not in the shower, not even to herself, in what felt like forever. But that was about to change. She told people she was just exploring other interests. But the truth? It hurt too much to sing, because every note now felt like rebellion, like she was doing something wrong. Meanwhile, Thomas's career exploded. He left his firm to start a consultancy specializing in civil rights, the kind that lands you on magazine covers and keynote stages. Praised as a true ally, Thomas was applauded for his understanding of black communities, even as he winced at Aaliyah's mother's southern accent. One night, after a polished dinner with his colleagues, he looked at her and said, "You know, maybe people would take you more seriously if you weren't so expressive." She blinked. Did he really just say that? "I mean," he continued, "not everyone thinks soul equals skill." That night, she couldn't sleep. But the end didn't come with a fight. It came with an absence. One morning, she woke up and his side of the closet was empty. His books were gone. The keys weren't on the hook. On the counter sat an envelope, her name printed in cold block letters. Inside was a note. He needed space. He'd moved into a temporary lease. Maybe they'd talk later after emotions settled. And attached, a formal document ending their lease. No argument, no goodbye, just gone. Aaliyah sat on the edge of the bed for hours. She didn't cry, not at first. She brewed coffee, swept the floor, took out the trash. Her body moved like it belonged to someone else. But when she picked up a photo from his graduation, her in soft yellow, him smiling like it was forced, she cracked. The sobs came hard, heavy, days blurred, then weeks. She couldn't tell anyone the truth, that the man she gave everything to had disappeared like she was disposable, that loving her, being herself, had somehow become too much. She unplugged her keyboard, stopped answering calls, and the woman who once turned silence into song became a shadow of herself. But deep beneath the wreckage, something whispered, faint, fragile, but alive. That whisper would be the start of everything. She didn't know it yet, but her voice, bruised, buried, battered, had survived. It was still waiting. Mornings lost their shape. There was no more shared coffee, no reason to get up early. Aaliyah floated through the hours like fog, silent, shapeless, alone. Her apartment felt like a museum now, curtains closed, sink full. The keyboard stood in the corner like a forgotten friend draped in dust, watching her unravel. 3 months had passed since he left, or rather disappeared. No slamming doors, no dramatic farewell, just a cold vanishing act. The man who once whispered love now communicated through legal paperwork and silence, as if erasing her was just another item on his to-do list. At first, she fought the tide, made to-do lists, ran errands, pretended motion would keep the grief at bay. But pain doesn't follow rules. It sneaks in disguised as tiredness, as apathy, as the need to lie in bed a little longer. Eventually, she stopped pretending. Music, once her salvation, now felt like a wound. She tried once, humming in the shower, just a few bars of her mother's favorite hymn, but her voice came out brittle, wrong. She stopped, pressed her back to the tile, let the water cover her tears. She unplugged her record player, packed away concert photos, muted the TV whenever a melody played. Silence felt safer than hearing what she'd lost, but that silence wasn't gentle. It screamed with everything left unsaid, all the songs she could no longer bring herself to sing. And yet, something inside still listened, still remembered. During those long, silent months, it was Kesha who began showing up more and more, uninvited, unbothered, and unstoppable. Cinnamon-toned skin, a wild crown of curls, and a personality as fierce as a summer storm. Kesha had been Aaliyah's best friend since college, a dance instructor who moved through life like she owned every room she entered. She didn't ask for permission to care. She brought groceries, folded laundry, opened the curtains as if she'd always lived there. She never asked Aaliyah how she was doing, because she already knew. She saw it in the dishes stacked high, the drawn curtains, the vacant eyes. But Kesha also remembered something else, the woman Aaliyah used to be. "You don't have to sing," she said one day, dropping a takeout bag on the table like a peace offering. "But you also don't have to vanish." Aaliyah didn't respond. Her appetite had long since left. "There's a spot at the art center, beginner vocal class, just 1 hour with kids." The idea hit her like a wave. Kids? A classroom? After everything? She hadn't stood in front of anyone since the breakup. "I can't," she whispered. Kesha didn't push. She just nodded, took a bite of her food, and started talking about the latest chaos at her dance studio. But that night, Aaliyah dreamed of a faceless child standing in a sunlit room, asking gently, "Why don't you sing anymore?" She woke with her fists clenched and the question still echoing in her chest. The dream came again and again, until one morning, exhausted more than brave, she called Kesha. "Fine, One class. The art center was inside a converted church. The walls were bright, full of scribbled drawings and the scent of glue and tempera paint. Aliyah stood in the doorway of the music room like it was a battlefield. Her notebook shook in her hands. Her heart pounded against her ribs like it was trying to escape. The kids were around 8 to 10, loud, squirmy, full of questions, and completely unaware of the storm inside her. She introduced herself softly. One girl raised her hand. "Do you sing?" Aliyah hesitated. "Not as much as I used to." The girl shrugged. "That's okay. Maybe you will again. No pressure. Just a simple truth." The class was light. Breathing games, clapping rhythms, a few silly singbacks. Aliyah found herself echoing Keisha's teaching style, playful, gentle, free. The kids responded with joy that was messy and real, and for the first time in ages, something moved inside her. Not joy exactly, more like recognition, something long asleep, starting to stir. After class, when the kids had gone, she sat at the upright piano in the corner. The keys were slightly out of tune. Her fingers hovered. Then she sang, just one line from "God Bless the Child." Her voice cracked. It wasn't smooth, but it was hers, and it was enough. Weeks passed. She kept teaching. A new rhythm returned to her life. Not applause in stages, but quiet order. Mornings had purpose. Meals weren't just survival, but care. She didn't sing for anyone, but she hummed. And in the privacy of her apartment, she whispered lyrics like prayers. One dusk, sitting on her balcony as the sky melted into gold and violet, she opened an old black notebook, a gift from her mother, long untouched. Inside, ideas, scribbled lyrics, half-formed melodies. Near the back was a verse she barely remembered writing. "They clipped my wings and called it love, told me silence was a kind of peace." She read it again, and suddenly, the truth inside those lines felt undeniable. That night, she wrote for hours. Her pen moved like it had just been waiting. The words were always there, silent, patient, just waiting for her to come back. And even though her voice was still cautious, still healing, it was hers again. Her voice had returned, not for applause, not for spectacle, but for something deeper, to reclaim, to heal, to remember who she'd been before everything was taken. Because truth, when you're ready to hear it, always finds a way back. That evening, the city felt quieter than usual. Atlanta seemed to exhale, as if even the streets were giving her space. Aliyah had just come home from teaching at the Community Arts Center. Her students had somehow both butchered and redeemed the same gospel hymn in a single hour, and it left her smiling. Her body ached, but in that good, lived-in way. She'd even laughed, really laughed. She dropped her worn leather bag on the kitchen table and reached for the kettle when she heard the faint scrape of mail against metal, something she barely checked anymore. Bills, junk ads, maybe a landlord's scribbled reminder. Still, curiosity nudged her toward the hallway. Among coupons and kids' charity flyers was one envelope that didn't belong, heavy, bone-colored, gold trim, her name written in elegant cursive. She didn't even have to open it. Her throat tightened. Her eyes stung. This wasn't kindness. It was calculation. Hands trembling, she opened it. "You are cordially invited to celebrate the union of Thomas Everett Harding and Jessica Marie Walton." The words were embossed, formal, flawless. Directions to a Charleston vineyard, a curated list of boutique hotels, and in the corner, Jessica's personal note, "We would be honored by your presence." Aliyah froze. The envelope slipped from her fingers. She stared at it on the floor like it might justify itself. It didn't. She didn't cry. This wasn't grief. That wound had long since scarred. This was something else, something sharp, a perfectly packaged insult wrapped in calligraphy. When Kesha arrived 20 minutes later, grocery bags in hand. Her chatter stopped the moment she saw Aaliyah's face. Without a word, Aaliyah held up the envelope. Kesha took it, read, and exhaled slow and low. "You've got to be kidding me. This is a stunt." Aaliyah said nothing. Her mouth was dry, disbelief coating her throat like chalk. "They want you to show up and shrink. That's the plan." "I know," Aaliyah whispered. "Then we're not going." Kesha's voice was sharp, protective. "We'll burn this thing and erase it." But Aaliyah just stared at the envelope like it was a mirror. All the compromises, the silences, the truths she'd buried to make herself smaller. Her mind flashed back, waiting for Thomas at this very table, brushing off her gut instincts when he brushed off her insecurities. The way he dismissed Jessica as just a colleague, but Aaliyah had seen it then. The way he adjusted his tone around her, the posture, the careful diction of a man performing admiration. "Do you want to go?" Kesha asked. Aaliyah didn't answer. The next few days were a fog. She taught, she smiled. But the invitation sat like a splinter in her mind, small, constant, impossible to ignore. She tried to convince herself maybe it wasn't malicious. Maybe Jessica was simply being gracious. But Aaliyah knew better. This was a power play. One night, standing before her bathroom mirror, the envelope beside the sink, she finally looked at herself, really looked. The shadows under her eyes, the strength returning to her spine, the unfamiliar peace in her reflection, and for the first time in a very long time, she didn't flinch. What would happen if she went, not to prove anything, not as a ghost, but fully, unapologetically, as herself? She heard her mother's voice then, quiet, steady, unshakable. "If someone calls you to witness your own funeral, make sure they see you living it." This wasn't revenge. This wasn't about Thomas or Jessica. This was about standing in a space where she once disappeared and choosing to breathe anyway. She picked up the invitation, stared at her reflection, and said out loud, "I'm going." And with those words, something long lost began stitching itself back together inside her. The week leading up to the trip, Aaliyah moved with quiet purpose, not rushed, not frantic, with the calm of someone reclaiming herself. Her first step was simple: find something to wear. Buried in the back of her closet was a gold dress, soft, flowing, untouched. Once, she'd thought it too bold, too bright, but under the light, it shimmered like it had been waiting for this moment. At the tailor's, she asked for it to fall just above the ankle. She wanted room to stand tall, and if needed, room to walk away. She also returned to her notebook. Since that night on the balcony, she'd been writing again, quietly, a melody about a woman shedding silence, one line at a time. In the evenings, she sat at her kitchen table, refining the song, coaxing hesitant notes from her keyboard. Her voice, still fragile, was beginning to trust itself again. Not loud, not flawless, but real. The night before they left, Kesha brought over a bottle of wine and a playlist titled "Break His Ego." But when she saw Aaliyah's calm, she didn't play a single song. She just sat beside her. "You're sure?" Kesha asked. "I'm not going for them," Aaliyah said. "No," Kesha replied. "You're going for her." She meant the version of Aaliyah that had once shrunk herself to fit someone else's shadow. Aaliyah smiled. "I'm going for me." And this time, she meant it. Charleston greeted them like a ghost from the past, warm, heavy, wrapped in magnolia air. The vineyard was stunning, like something off a magazine cover, a mansion with pale blue shutters, hills covered in perfect rows of grapes. It was designed to impress, and it did if you measured life by money and appearances. Kesha parked the rental behind a line of glossy black sedans, the kind that said everything without a single word. Aaliyah sat for a moment, taking it in. She had slept well the night before. Her body carried a quiet strength. But now, with the scent of roses and wealth thick in the air, her certainty flickered. Kesha, cool behind her sunglasses, leaned in. "You good?" Aaliyah nodded. "As I'll ever be." She stepped out in that gold dress. Her hair was pulled into a simple low bun, with a single braid tucked at her temple. No jewelry except for one thin bracelet, her mother's, a reminder of roots deeper than pain. Kesha, fierce in a dark green jumpsuit, walked beside her like a bodyguard of elegance and steel. Inside, chilled air washed over them, the kind of chill only luxury creates. A server offered champagne. Aaliyah took a glass, letting the coldness anchor her. The ceremony had already happened, a quiet church affair that morning. What remained was the celebration. Tables stretched out across the courtyard behind the house, linen draped, rose-filled, magazine-perfect. Overhead, warm lights hung like stars on strings. A quartet played Norah Jones with just enough softness to sound like memory. Their table was near the edge, discreet, tucked beside the dance floor. Aaliyah was grateful. She didn't need to be seen. She just needed to stand. As they walked through the space, guests turned, some with curiosity, some with indifference. But no one, not even Thomas, would ever see her smile again. Some recognized her. They didn't need to speak. Maybe they'd heard her sing once, or seen her name on a flyer for an event Thomas had used as PR. But their silence said it all. They knew who she was, and who she wasn't. Thomas appeared like a shadow, suddenly there, talking to a small circle of guests near the main table, laughing in that smooth, curated way he had mastered, one hand in his pocket, the other making gestures just sharp enough to seem natural. He wore a cream-colored suit, no tie, a pale flower pinned to his lapel. He looked leaner now, sculpted by success, polished by image. When their eyes met, his smile twitched, just for a second, then returned, even, polite. He raised his glass, a subtle nod, maybe recognition, maybe thanks. She acknowledged him with a slight tilt of her head, then looked away. She didn't need to search for Jessica. Jessica found her. Later, after toasts had been made and Thomas's father delivered a speech like he was running for office, Jessica approached, a vision in champagne silk, her smile bright enough to reflect off the silverware, her hair smooth, her voice smooth, every word measured. "Aaliyah," she said too warmly, "I'm so glad you came." Aaliyah stood. "Thank you. Congratulations." Jessica nodded slightly. "It means a lot to Thomas, that you're here." There was no warmth in the subtext, no grace, just a claim. This was her world now. Aaliyah was merely visiting. Kesha's silent presence behind Aaliyah was a wall of steel, a reminder, you don't have to play this game. "I almost didn't come," Aaliyah replied evenly. "But then I thought, why not? Closure has its place." Jessica's smile held, but her eyes changed. "Well, if there's anything we can do to make you more comfortable," then, as if casually, "we're inviting guests to share something later. Performances, tributes. Thomas always said your voice was unforgettable." A twist of the knife, disguised as a compliment. Aaliyah felt something old shift inside her. "No pressure, of course," Jessica added, and walked away. Kesha watched her go. "She's trying to turn this into a stage." "I know." "You going to let her?" The question hung in the air. The rest of the evening moved like a rehearsed play. Polished speeches, orchestrated dances, conversations that never dug deep enough to touch real emotion. Aaliyah moved through it like a ghost, visible but peripheral, until sunset. The MC, a man named Carter with a golden voice and the confidence of a fundraiser, took the mic. "Now, I don't want to put anyone on the spot," he said, clearly intending to do just that. "But I happen to know someone very special is here tonight. A woman whose voice once lit up our college nights, Miss Aaliyah Brooks. Would you do us the honor?" The crowd turned. Eyes, faces, breath paused. Aaliyah looked at her hands, clenched around her wine glass, her pulse in her throat. "You don't have to," Kesha whispered. "You don't owe them anything." But that's the thing. Aaliyah didn't feel the weight of pressure anymore. She felt something else. She looked up, Thomas watching her. Not smug, not ashamed, just still. Jessica beside him, calm and perfectly arranged, her hand resting lightly on his. Then Aaliyah turned to Kesha and stood, not for applause, not for them, but because her voice was no longer something to hide. She walked to the microphone. The courtyard glowed with string lights like a sky made of memory. The MC stepped aside. Someone in the crowd softly said her name. She took a breath and sang. She took the mic and let the weight of it rest in her palm. "I'd like to sing something of my own," she said, her voice even, unshaken. No piano, no backing track. Then she closed her eyes. The first note rose slow, shaped by breath and weathered by every ache she'd ever carried. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't polished. It was honest. And before the first verse had ended, the courtyard fell silent. Not quiet, still. The kind of stillness that holds the air in place. Glasses suspended, forks frozen midair. Even the servers stopped, trays half raised. Her voice, bare and unguarded, floated like fog through the vines and over the tables, soft, steady, unmistakably hers. She hadn't planned this moment, but in a way, her entire life had been leading here. From her mother's piano to the night Thomas walked away, to every lyric she buried under years of silence. Her voice trembled on the second line, cracked on the third, but she didn't stop. She leaned into the break, letting the fracture speak louder than any perfection could. The song was hers, not just written by her, but carved from her. A quiet anthem born of grief, rebirth, and clarity. I gave you quiet when you asked for peace. I gave you stillness when you feared the storm. But my silence wasn't love. It was erasure. And now I sing not to be heard, but because I am. With each line, her voice grew stronger, fuller. She stood taller, her breath deepened, her tone warmed, and something inside her, something long dimmed, flared back to life. She looked out into the crowd. Some faces watched in awe, others blinked, unsure what they were feeling. One woman wiped her eyes. An older man leaned in, transfixed. Even the servers were still. Then she saw Thomas, frozen, his smile gone, replaced with something unreadable. He hadn't expected this. Maybe he thought she'd decline politely, or play something safe. But instead, she had sung a truth he'd buried right alongside her. Jessica sat next to him, rigid, her smile gone tight and thin. But Aaliyah didn't linger. She turned inward, back to the memory of her mother's hands guiding hers across piano keys, to her students' laughter, to the lyric page she'd slept beside for weeks, and to herself, not diminished, not erased, but whole. The final verse lifted like a quiet storm. You called me wild, and I believed you. You called me too much, and I shrank. But I am not a cage for your comfort. I am a storm with a name. The last note didn't end. It hovered, vibrated through glasses, across breath, into silence. No one moved. And then, slowly, applause began. It started at the edge. Then another table, then another. Chairs scraped back. People stood. Hands came together with force, not politeness. Something deeper. Applause born not of performance, but of recognition. Aaliyah stood in it, unsteady, chest rising, hands shaking. She hadn't expected this. The release, the arrival, the vindication. Kesha was the first to reach her, arms open, eyes shining. You did it, she whispered, wrapping her in an embrace that was both armor and softness. "You took it all back." Aaliyah nodded, unable to speak, her throat raw, not from effort, but from truth. As she stepped down, hands reached for her, gentle touches on her arms, her shoulders. Some offered soft words, others only met her eyes and squeezed her hand. One woman, silver-haired, took her hands in both of hers and said, "That wasn't a performance, that was resurrection." Thomas wasn't near the stage, but eventually he came, moving slowly, deliberately, through the crowd, face pale, eyes searching, and she waited, not as the woman he once knew, but as the one he never truly saw. They met at the edge of the garden, away from the clustered laughter and polished tables. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Then Thomas said, "I didn't know you could still sing like that." It wasn't praise. It was a quiet confession, a man admitting he hadn't looked closely enough. Aaliyah studied him. He looked older now, or maybe just more real. The gloss of curated success had faded, and what was left was someone finally seeing the pieces he'd left behind. "I never stopped," she said. He opened his mouth, then closed it, looked down at his shoes. "I was wrong," he murmured. "Back then, about a lot of things." "Yes," she replied gently. "You were. I didn't ask you to break me, but you did." He nodded, slowly, as if each word etched itself into him. "I'm sorry." She looked at him, really looked, and for the first time in years, there was no sting, no resentment, just a quiet clarity. "It's not about us anymore, Thomas," she said. "It never really was." He accepted that with a small nod. He didn't try to argue. He didn't ask for more. He simply turned and walked away. Jessica didn't approach. She stayed at her table, surrounded by friends and family, her posture composed, hands folded neatly. But the proud tilt of her chin had softened, just slightly. She looked like someone who'd seen a reflection she wasn't expecting. Aaliyah returned to Kesha, to the warmth of someone who had seen her long before the pain and stayed long after. As the night wore on, more people came. Some offered kind words. Some simply stood near her, silent, reverent. One man in his 50s stepped forward with quiet confidence. "My name's Michael Harris," he said. "I used to manage jazz greats in the Blue Room. I wasn't expecting to feel something tonight. But that was something else." She thanked him softly. "I'd like to offer you a night," he said. "No contracts, no expectations, just your voice, our stage." Aaliyah didn't answer right away. She let the offer rest in her chest like a rising breath. "I'll think about it," she said, but they both knew what she meant. Later, when the stars blinked softly overhead and the air had cooled with night, Aaliyah found a quiet bench at the edge of the vineyard. Behind her, the reception softened into background noise, no longer pressing, no longer important. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, the bracelet her mother had given her catching moonlight, and she smiled, not because the pain was gone, but because it had finally spoken. And now, so had she. There was a silence then, not the silence of performance, not even the one after applause, but the kind of silence that comes after truth is spoken aloud, and something inside you shifts forever. She felt the pressure of his presence, the weight of eyes that had once looked through her, but it didn't shake her. "I'm sorry," Thomas said again, and this time she believed him. But that didn't change the past. She took a deep breath and released it. "It's not about us anymore." The words didn't land like a dagger. They landed like a closed door. Quiet. Final. He nodded slowly, and then, without asking for more, he walked away. Jessica didn't follow him. She stayed at the head table, ringed by relatives and careful conversations, but her eyes found Aaliyah's, and something in them had shifted. Not admiration, not warmth, but recognition. A silent acknowledgement that Aaliyah was not someone easily dismissed. Aaliyah turned back to Kesha. Together they moved toward the edge of the courtyard, where lanterns swayed in the breeze, and the world softened. There, from the shadows, a man stepped forward. "Miss Brooks?" he asked. She paused. "Yes, I'm Michael Harris," he said. "I was here as a guest, but I also run a venue in Manhattan, the Blue Room." She knew it. Everyone who loved jazz did. A space carved out of history, tucked between two bookstores in the village. The kind of room where music mattered more than name. "I didn't expect a performance tonight," he said. "But what you did, that wasn't just music. That was something else entirely." She opened her mouth, then stopped, unsure how to respond. "I'd like to offer you a night," he said. "One set, no restrictions, just your voice." Aaliyah blinked. "Seriously?" He nodded. "Your voice deserves a room." Kesha grinned. "Girl, say yes." Aaliyah looked at both of them, her chest rising fast, her heart thudding. She smiled. "I'd be honored." He handed her a card, and then, just like that, he disappeared back into the crowd. Later, when the reception had faded to its last few notes, tipsy laughter, waitstaff stacking glasses, Aaliyah stood at the edge of the vineyard beneath a moon low and silver. Behind her, Thomas and Jessica were beginning their next chapter. But here, in the hush of night, Aaliyah stood free. She pulled out her phone and typed, "Guess who sang tonight?" A reply came minutes later. "I knew you would." The voice never leaves. It just waits. Tears filled her eyes, but this time they felt clean. Not pain, not loss, release. She wasn't a wound anymore. She was a voice, and she was ready to be heard. A month passed, like the space between inhale and exhale. Each morning she woke wondering if that night at the vineyard had been real, until she saw the email from the Blue Room, the music sheets on her desk, the keyboard back in its corner. It had happened, and now something new was waiting to begin. She moved with quiet focus, not chasing a return. She wasn't trying to reclaim an old version of herself. This wasn't a comeback. It was a beginning. Her students felt it. Devin, a boy who rarely spoke above a whisper, looked up after class and said, "Miss Brooks, your voice sounds free." She smiled, pressing a hand to her chest. "Yeah, Devin, it is." Evenings were spent writing, not just lyrics, but entire arrangements. She reached out to an old pianist friend from college. He said yes before she could finish the sentence. They rehearsed like they were remembering something, not learning it. The music came easy, not perfect, but right. One evening, she stood in her apartment facing a mirror. Not the small ones in her hallway or bathroom, but a tall standing mirror her mother once used for fittings. She had kept it hidden in a closet, too large, too honest. But now she faced it, not shrinking, not apologizing. She stood in front of it, gold light falling on her shoulders, and saw herself fully. A voice, a woman, a storm with a name, and this time, she didn't look away. Now it stood beside her front window, bathed in golden evening light. The mirror, no longer hidden, no longer feared. Aaliyah wore a black satin dress, simple, elegant, with a quiet strength in every line. Her hair was swept back, no heavy jewelry, no forced shine, just her. She turned sideways, then squared her shoulders and met her own gaze. No longer trying to imagine how Thomas would see her, no longer wondering what Jessica might be thinking. She wasn't shrinking herself for comfort. She stood in her own truth, whole, unfiltered, unafraid. The day of the performance arrived with unexpected calm. Even New York seemed to soften. its usual roar dialed down to a hush. In the car, she sat quietly with her fingers resting on the music binder in her lap. Keisha, radiant in emerald and leather, glanced at her as they approached the venue. "You good?" Aaliyah nodded, eyes on the quiet entrance tucked between two bookshops. "I'm ready." Inside, the blue room glowed with velvet blues and polished mahogany. The stage was modest, wrapped in warm light and framed by thick curtains. The audience trickled in, musicians, poets, old jazz lovers in crisp suits, and dreamers wrapped in denim and hope. Olivia and Rachel had come from Philadelphia. Michael Harris stood near the bar, chatting with a silver-haired cellist. The hum of voices rose and fell like tidewater. Backstage, her pianist gave her a nod. She returned it, steady. Her hands were warm. Her chest lifted not with nerves, but with joy. Not joy for approval, but joy for arrival. The house lights dimmed. A soft applause rolled forward. And then the stage lights rose, wrapping her in gold. She stepped forward. "Good evening," she said, her voice resonant, unshaken. "I'm Aaliyah Brooks. Thank you for being here." The first song was new, born after the wedding, titled Unwritten, a song about taking back the pen. Her voice rose slowly, deliberately, not polished, but layered with history, with memory, with truth. By the second chorus, the room stilled, not stiff, but held in reverence. She moved into Mother's Mirror, a hymn to her lineage, and The Shape of Stillness, a soft lament that made a man near the back quietly cry. And finally, Storm with a Name. The room held its breath, and when the last note fell, the silence stretched, then broke into thunderous applause, not rehearsed, not polite, real. Some guests stood instantly. Others followed, drawn upward by something deeper than appreciation, recognition. She smiled, not carefully, not small, but wide, full. Later backstage, Kesha wrapped her in a crushing hug. "You did that. You hear me? You did that." Michael handed her water, his voice hushed. "That wasn't a debut. That was a declaration." Aaliyah laughed, breathless, glowing. "Thank you." Much later, long after the candles had faded to smoke and the chairs had emptied, she stood alone on stage. She looked out, vacant seats, the scent of wine, a faint echo of applause still hanging like a blessing. From her bag, she pulled a folded lyric sheet, her mother's handwriting, long saved. Words she knew by heart, but never left behind. Not because she needed reminding, but because remembering was part of becoming. She whispered the first line, "My voice is not for their approval. It is for my truth." Outside, the city stirred. A cab honked. Neon signs flickered. Somewhere, someone else was singing their first note into the dark. And Aaliyah stepped off the stage, not returning to who she was, but stepping fully into who she had always been. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe for more. Check out the next video. You won't want to miss it. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Their voice might be waiting too.